Kevin Durant is never afraid of a little back and forth, especially with fans and especially on Twitter. He had this recent exchange with a fan on the platform and it's drawn a bit of attention. It's kind of sparked a mini debate as to what actually wins championships, offense or defense. Now the famous old adage is that offense sells tickets and defense wins championships. Earlier on, when I was a younger basketball fan, I simply accepted this adage as an indisputable truth, one of the foundational pillars of basketball itself. I pretty much paralleled the concept to the core aspects of the Declaration of Independence, how the founding fathers held life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as self-evident truths. I looked at the philosophy of defense wins championships in the same light. But now that I'm a little older, I can actually think about these concepts myself and challenge them a tad bit. So, do defenses actually win championships? Or is KD onto something? I love stats and numbers, so to tackle this debate, I utilized them. I looked at the offenses and defenses of the past 25 championship winning teams using offensive and defensive rating. I chose 25 for 3 reasons. Number 1, it's an attractive number. Number 2, it's large enough to be a valid sample size and small enough for me to conduct research in a reasonable amount of time. And number 3, the window starts immediately after the last MJ Bulls championship. So with this run, I'm not starting in the middle of a dynasty or anything, which may have skewed data. So first and foremost, these are my findings regarding the regular season offensive and defensive rating standings for the championship winners of the past 25 seasons. Obviously, with 30 teams in the regular season, both axes scale from 1 to 30. So the better ranked teams are going to be towards the bottom left of the graph. Defensive rating standing is on the y-axis, and offensive rating standing is on the x-axis. So here are the teams. Obviously, with only championship winners in the data, they're all quality teams. So of course, about 90% of the squads are going to be clustered very deep in the bottom left corner. But we do have some outliers. One in which is the most recent championship team, the 2023 Denver Nuggets. They were 5th ranked in offensive rating, so they are adequately oriented towards the left, but they're higher than the cluster of average championship teams due to their relatively weak regular season defense, only being ranked 15th in defensive rating. Typically, championship contending teams are top 10 in offense and in defense in the regular season, but the Nuggets are somewhat of an anomaly in this case. For the same reason, the 2001 Lakers team is an anomaly, being ranked 2nd in offense but 21st in defense. The 2 other anomalies over the past 25 years are the 2022 Golden State Warriors and the 2004 Pistons. Their defenses were superb, both in the top 2 in rating over the respective regular seasons, but their subpar offenses were what made them anomalies. Championship teams over the past 25 years had an average offensive ranking of 6.68 and an average defensive ranking of 5.6. So, on average, these championship teams had a defense ranked 1.08 spots higher than their offense. So I guess this is one point in the argument on the side of team defense wins championships. However, the regular season is not where you win championships, they're won in the playoffs. So this upcoming data is in the same time frame with the same championship winning teams, but specifically in the postseason. We have postseason offensive rating and postseason defensive rating. Now 16 teams make the playoffs, so both axes will be scaled from 1 to 16 now. This is where it gets a little interesting. Anomalies here are the 2000 Lakers, number 1 ranked offense in the playoffs, but 13th defensively. They're the furthest from the average cluster line. Then we have the 03 Spurs, the 2021 Bucks, and 06 Heat, all teams that had elite defenses in the playoffs, but had offenses that deviated them from the cluster. Another thing to note is that all of the anomalies from the prior regular season data gravitated into the new cluster when looking at the postseason data. The 01 Lakers and 2023 Nuggets both had subpar defenses in the regular season, but buckled down on that end in the playoffs to put themselves in line with average championship defenses. The 22 Warriors and 04 Pistons were regular season anomalies offensively, but became more efficient in the postseason to position themselves inside the cluster. Compared to the regular season, the average championship team cluster is a bit bigger, and that's because the cluster got taller, meaning the average on the y-axis increased, meaning the defensive rankings got comparatively worse. Now, out of 16 teams, the average ranking of a championship offense was 3.92, and the average ranking for defenses was 3.96. So now offenses and defenses of championship teams were almost exactly the same on average in the playoffs. But the intriguing differential is highlighted when you look comparatively at this data between the regular season and postseason. Now obviously the rankings in the playoffs are quote-unquote higher because there's less teams in competition, going from 30 to 16. So to put these two measures on the same scale, I translated them to percentiles. Looking at the data from the last graph, over the past 25 years in the regular season, championship teams had an offense in the 77.8th percentile and a defense in the 81.3rd percentile, which makes sense because, like I said, the defenses were better than the offenses in the regular season. Though in the postseason, these teams' offenses were in the 75.5th percentile and their defenses were in the 75.25th percentile. So they both get a little worse, which makes sense because in the postseason, you're facing teams of higher ability. You will no longer face tanking teams for a significant portion of your upcoming schedule. However, the bigger drop-off is on the defensive side of the ball. Championship offenses have a 2.3 percentile drop-off going to the postseason, while defenses have a 6.05 percentile drop-off. So this could be a point in the argument towards Team KD/Team Offense wins championships. Based off this metric, championship offenses comparatively remain consistent from the regular season to the playoffs, while defenses have a more statistically glaring drop-off. Now the last bit of data involves teams that didn't win the championship but were right there on the precipice. Specifically, they're the teams that I viewed as the second best teams in each postseason over the last 25 years. To be exact, the teams in this measurement were either the team that lost in the championship series or the team that lost in the conference finals to the championship winning team. The method in which I chose which team to use for a specific year was predicated on playoff net rating. For example, in 2022, I was choosing between the Boston Celtics, NBA Finals loser, or Dallas Mavericks, the conference finals loser to the Warriors. I opted for the Celtics because they had a much higher net rating, so they were statistically the better team, and obviously better via the eye test for whatever that's worth. However, in 2018, I chose the team that lost in the conference finals to the Warriors and not the team that they beat in the finals. The Rockets had a much better playoff net rating than the Cavs. It makes sense because I remember at the time, people were saying that the NBA Finals pretty much occurred in the Western Conference Finals between the Rockets and Warriors. The reason I wanted findings on these teams was to measure where the discrepancy was between the second best teams and the champions. Was it more frequently on the offensive end or on defense? So I collected the data on the second best teams of the past 25 years and found that they had an average offensive ranking of 5.84 and an average defensive ranking of 5.2. So in comparison to the championship winning teams, their offenses were ranked 1.92 spots lower, while their defenses were ranked 1.24 spots lower than the championship winning teams. Statistically significantly enough, the bigger discrepancy is on the offensive side of the ball between the champions and the second best teams of the past 25 years, meaning that more often than not, you can point at the shortcomings offensively as the bigger factor preventing a team from attaining NBA immortality via winning a championship. I think this is the most significant finding of my research, and it allocates another point for KD and team offense in the argument. So in my research, 2 points to 1, team offense walks away with the W in the argument over team defense. And based on my research, KD is right. Offense actually wins championships. Now I'm not saying that KD is 1000% correct based off this study alone, but this type of thing makes you wonder. How many quote-unquote basketball self-evident truths like defense wins championships can be challenged by numbers in a similar way? For the longest time, I blindly thought that phrase was indisputable and irrefutable. But after this simple, elementary study, I can definitively say that this phrase shouldn't be heralded as something like the Magna Carta or Holy Grail. Do I wholeheartedly believe that offense wins championships? No. I think you need both offense and defense equally, which shouldn't feel like an outlandish statement to make. There's only two sides of the ball, but if you go on Twitter or Instagram, you'll only see people make arguments that fall on two different sides of the spectrum. It's quite a polarizing debate. I didn't conduct this study to prove one side right over the other. I just sought to investigate by using numbers if there's any possible pushback to be made on a basketball philosophical idea that's been echoed throughout talking circles for as long as I can remember, and most definitely for a longer time than that. So again, I pose the question, what other basketball self-evident truths can be challenged or even debunked by the numbers?